Imagine you're hunting solo, several hours hike from the trailhead. It's night, and you're tired but wakeful because a massive storm had blown in. The tent that has served you well for years is shuddering and popping like a drum in the wind. Rain slashes sideways at the tent. And you're starkly aware that your sleeping bag and your clothing are not adequate to survive through the cold if your tent blows up and everything gets soaked. Now most time, those nervous nights pass and you stay safe and warm in your tent. Not this night. A shrieking gust of wind grabs your tent and blows it up. Poles crackling like fireworks and fabric shredding like ribbons. In seconds, you and all your gear are drenched with the onslaught of pounding rain. It's cold, barely above freezing. Suddenly, a rejuvenating solo hunt turned into a fight for survival. What do? You try to hunker down and stay warm enough to live and weather the storm in place? Do you gather whatever you absolutely need and begin hiking for the truck? Now this scenario actually happened to a good friend of mine, Tyler Friel, in Alaska on a solo sheep hunt. I hope to have him on the show to tell us his story soon. He hiked something like 7 hours through the night, fighting blinding rain and crazy winds, back to his truck. He almost didn't make it. Thankfully, when he did, he had the gear necessary to get warmed up, get some calories on board, and get energized enough to safely make the drive home. So whether your base is your truck at the trailhead or a big camp packed in on horses or whatnot, you should always have the gear needed to keep you alive and get rejuvenated if you pull out of remote country in bad shape. This episode, we're going to take a deep dive into exactly what that gear should be. And I'm Joseph Von Benedict, and this is the Backcountry Hunting Podcast. Our primary topic this episode was inspired by a listener and a loyal Patreon member that we'll call Spencer. He requested an episode on what to have in a backcountry hunting truck. Now that's interesting enough in and of itself, but I figured we'd take it one step farther and apply the concept to base camps with a focus on backup and emergency survival gear. So now Spencer listed a few gear items that he makes sure to keep in his truck: a shovel, a tarp, a full-size spare tire, a tent, and a small battery-powered tire inflator. And he mentioned that that's just a start. The list can be as long as you want it to be, depending on whether you want to go minimalist or whether you want to be prepared for every eventuality. Now that, folks, is a decision that only you can make. I'm just one man, and my experience is what it is. I tend to, like most of us, most humanity, right? We prepare for the future based on our past. So this discussion is what it is. Take what you can use from it, implement it in your own hunting life, your fishing, backcountry, adventuring life, whatever that may be. Use what you can use and don't worry about the rest, right? Maybe you don't need some of this. Maybe you need others. And as I'll mention here at the end, I'd love to hear your feedback on any items that we failed to mention. Just email us, joseph@backcountrypodcast.com, or better yet, send a message on patreon.com/backcountry. We always try and prioritize those. So, we're going to unpack a bunch of different items here in a minute. But let's talk first about kind of, what your base should be. It should not only have the gear that you may need for immediate survival, such as when you arrive back to your base camp or your truck in pretty rough condition, but it should also have all of the gear you'd potentially need to get back to civilization in case of a catastrophic emergency, whether that's a compound fractured femur in your hunting partner, or even you, worse, right? Or an act of God that's brought in a storm of epic proportions and washed the road out, forest fires, whatever. I mean, there are some things that can be pretty rough to get through. All we can do is prepare to our best ability for the broad spectrum, right? The most anticipated stuff, and then, by golly, if we get in a real pickle, use our ingenuity to get out of it, right? Can you just imagine, folks, what the early mountain men must have felt like in the brain power they must have put to work to get through some of the situations they found themselves in? Often they were hundreds and hundreds of miles from the nearest civilization, and they were solo. They had no means of communication. Their emergency supplies, as far as medical supplies, were scant at best, if they even existed. Plus, they're actually fighting hostiles, everything from bears to Native Americans and so forth in the past. Wow, they were some pretty cool people. Now, let's add a little bit to this list that Spencer started for us. I'm going to add a good camp axe or saw, I mean, if you can have both, right? Extra water and a purifier or a purifying tablet kit. How about an aggressive fire starter? And we'll talk about the use of that word aggressive here in a minute. Medical supplies. Depends on you and what you may need, the type of hunting you do, whether you have any pre-existing conditions such as a heart condition or diabetes or allergies, things like that. Hand soap. Simple, but sometimes can be maybe not crucial for survival, but long-term effects can be greatly minimized by aggressively washing a wound with good cleansing soap rather than just leaving the dirt in there to build bacteria, right, till you can get out to help. How about an easy one? Food and energy powder. Sometimes you come out of the backcountry not just dehydrated, but real hungry and drained because you've not eaten, sometimes for a day and a half or more. Having a little bit of food, having some energy powder if you're real sleepy or just exhausted can help you make a safe drive into where you can get help. What else? Let's see. How about a bit of cash? Sometimes you get to a little gas station or whatnot. These still exist where they want cash. Most of them will take a credit card now, but what if electricity's down and their dial-up connection to run a credit card won't work? You can still get a little bit of fuel, some food, and other supplies if you've got a little bit of cash on hand. Of course, maybe you just need to buy something from a pal and he's selling giant Snicker bars for $10 a piece. Cheap in some situations, right, my friends? How about spare ammo? This is one that we all hope we don't need. But if you fall and greatly knock your scope off, or worst case scenario, you get in a run and gun with an animal that you hit poorly with your first shot and run out of shells, having some spare ammo on hand can really make a big difference. Taking that a step further, potentially a backup rifle. Now, I wouldn't leave a real expensive rifle sitting in your pickup. If you do leave a rifle in your pickup, leave it discreetly. Put it under a seat somewhere. Throw an old coat over it or something that looks, just makes it look like there's nothing worth stealing in your truck. Base camp, just be sure that you trust any other campers that may be around if you leave it in a tent or whatnot, and slide it under your sleeping pad or something when you're not there so that it's not an obvious temptation to anybody that may swing by and visit your camp, see if anybody's home to chat for a bit. If you're a bow hunter, extra arrows. For the same reason that you may need extra ammo. How about a bow tool in case something goes wacky or comes loose on your compound bow? Very common situation to have an arrow rest or a quiver or a sight come loose after a lot of tramping around in the backcountry with it, especially if it's rattling around on an ATV or in a pickup truck where that constant vibration can loosen screws. A portable bow press can really save a hunt if you, say, become derailed, your string comes off your cams or something like that. Can make a big difference, but you kind of have to know what you're doing to use those. But if you know what you're doing, by all means, have a little portable bow press. Backup knife, extra batteries for headlamps and radios and such. Spare eyeglasses and or contacts. Sunscreen, salve or lotion for chapped hands and lips. And always, of course, a fresh set of clothes. Sometimes you'll come out of the backcountry simply soaking wet and frozen, and you need something warm to put on before you can shake off that chill. Maybe you've got bear grease and guts all over your clothes and you just reek and you're really uncomfortable. Maybe you add an injury with a knife or a broadhead or something on top of that. Now you've got an open wound that's exposed to grease, bacteria, gut matter, and possibly, since bow seasons are usually early here in the West, heat. That's a great recipe for a really bad infection, right? So clean clothes, soap, and water can solve a lot of those issues. How about a really good book to pass the time if you get stuck at your base with little to do for several days? This may be the case if you've tagged out early and you've got friends that are hunting, and for whatever reason you need a camp tender. Maybe you've got a half dozen horses that need tending, and so, well, since you got a big 6-point bull on the ground, you're the guy, right? You're cooking, you're cleaning up after everybody, you're tending the horses, and glad to do it, because the backcountry has already blessed you richly, right, my friends? But there will be some slow times during those days, and sitting by a little creek and reading a book is awesome. Alternates, of course, would be something like an audiobook or, movies downloaded onto a smartphone or something, but really a book is kind of the classic way to go. All right, so let's circle back now, folks, and start at the top with what we can kind of loosely consider to be the most fundamental, necessary items. And these can, of course, vary by individual and by the type of hunting you do. This is as I say, kind of an individual matter, but let's start at the top and discuss each one of these in a little bit more detail. We're going to start with water, because that's one of the most common mistakes that hard-charging hunters make in the backcountry, and it's exacerbated by altitude. This is dehydration, right? It's a pain to carry water. Water's heavy. Filtering it takes time, and most of the time folks just don't carry enough and they'll get themselves in trouble. Most of the time they get out of it by chugging a bunch of water when they get back to their little spike camp, or when they cross a stream they can filter some or whatever. I always recommend carrying a life straw or a similar portable type filter in your pocket. Even better in your pocket than in your day pack, just because then it's always on you. And every time you cross fresh, clear water, get down there, even if you're not thirsty, and chug as much as you can hold. You're a lot better off to pee every 30 minutes in the backcountry, folks, than to risk getting dehydrated. And you never know when you're going to find your next source of water, right? Unless you know the country already real well from hunting it in the past. Meanwhile, carry enough water in your day pack to get you through whatever you foresee, even if you have to kind of go sparse on it. Combined, drinking when opportunity provides out of fresh sources, plus carrying just enough to get you through the day, a hard working day, right, is usually the safest way to approach that. But I'm getting off on a tangent here. Back at base camp, whether that's your truck or a horse camp, whatever the case may be, you should have a big 5-gallon jug full of water, or a couple of portable 3-gallon jugs that collapse when you're hauling them. As soon as you get to your base camp site, inflate those things and fill them. Filter water, fill them with good fresh water, and keep them full, because you never know when you and or hunting partners may be coming in hot, exhausted, and real thirsty, right? If you need to wash with it too. If somebody's got a bad wound from something that could infect real fast, the quicker you can wash that out with a lot of fresh water and soap, the more likely you are to prevent a serious infection. All right, next, we're going to go with food and energy powder. If you don't have food at your base camp, whether that's your pickup or a big camp in the high country, you've done something seriously wrong. You should always have ample food in your base camp. Now, that probably kind of needs, if you're leaving it, right? If you're just stashing your stuff and leaving it to spike camp or hunt mobile, fast and nomadic around the mountains around your base camp, that food should probably be something that doesn't spoil easy. You're not going to want a bunch of Captain Crunch and milk there, folks. Probably not even things like cheese and summer sausage. You're better off with freeze-dried meals and jerky, nuts, trail mix, things like that. Chocolate is always good because it will infuse you with energy pretty quickly, but make sure that you're keeping it somewhere where it'll stay cool and it won't melt. Things like that are, a bit easier if you're working out of a base camp that is continuously occupied by other hunters. because they can help maintain food that would spoil otherwise. They'll probably eat it while you're gone, right? Let's be real about it here. As far as the energy powders, some folks don't like to use them, and that's just fine, but I've found that if you have to push through just about anything when you're already exhausted and your muscles are already worn out, fatigued, possibly stressed from a lot of steep climbing and carrying heavy loads. Let's say you're packing an elk a couple miles through real steep country. Man, having some high quality energy powder by Mountain Ops or Wilderness Athlete, anything like that can make a big difference. I always carry a day or two's worth in my day pack with me, and then I have a stash of it back at camp. And I'm always happy to share because, as I've said before on the show, you share a little bit of energy powder with your hunting partner who didn't bring any when he's packing your meat. You're going to have a lot more fun together, right? So the other area where some energy powder can really make a big difference is in a true emergency where you have to stay alert and sharp and on your game, whether you're driving through the night trying to get out to help or maintaining watch in camp if you've been raided by a grizzly or something like that and you need to stay on top of things. One tip, energy powders can dehydrate you, so drink copiously with it. That's one reason I like powders better than a pre-mixed drink that you haul in or keep in your truck, because like a little 5-hour energy bottle, they work great, but there's not a lot of fluids with them. If you mix Ignite by Mountain Ops or whatever your preferred powder is in a liter of water, you're going to get a bunch of hydration at the same time as you drink it. Also, I find that if you're just on a diet of freeze-dried food and you're kind of going thin on your nutrition, the energy powders can give you a little bit of not cramps, but like they sit a little heavy on your stomach and your intestines if you chug them on an empty stomach and you're not exercising. That's the caveat. As long as you're exercising, they seem to flow into your bloodstream and it works great. But if you're just doing a recuperation thing and you're sitting and you drink some energy powder, eat a granola bar or something with it. My experience, your body will absorb it more cheerfully that way. Depends, of course, on the brand and the type and what's in it and so forth. How about a good shelter, which can be a tent, a backup tent. It can be your primary tent. It can be a tarp. A tarp can be really, really useful, whether you're rolling up a bunch of gear that you don't want to get wet, or elk quarters that are going in the back of your pickup truck and you're driving through the rain. You don't want them to get soaking wet for hours on end. A tarp can be a very good asset. Now, there's several different types. Of course, an emergency tarp, don't buy a lightweight, cheap, flimsy plastic tarp, but maybe a heavy-duty plastic tarp. Leave it in the wrapper, stick it under the seat of your truck, or haul it into base camp with you. That'll work fine. But if you want a tarp that will serve you day in and day out, year after year, and will be durable, there's two primary types that I like. One is a heavy-duty rubberized tarp. They're much quieter than the plastic tarps when you get them in the wind. They handle UV rays from the sun much better. They're much less likely to tear. They're more waterproof. The downside, of course, is that they're heavy. They can be very heavy. So this really isn't an option if you're backpacking base camp in. So if you're backpacking, you're better off with one of the high-tech lightweight tarps. And they're so thin, they don't seem like they could possibly shed water. But if you pitch them on an angle, they generally will do a pretty good job. You can create a lean-to or an A-frame shelter with a tarp, one of these packable tarps, and it works pretty darn well. I recommend having both types and just use them as appropriate for your situation. Next, and really, really importantly, is to have good fire starting material. And this is in addition to what you carry in your pockets and in your day pack. Always carry some sort of fire starter in your pockets, on your person, not in your pack, because packs can get lost. You can leave them as you're making the final 200-yard stalk to try and shoot an elk with your bow, or whatever the case is. You might lose your pack crossing a stream or a river. You could roll down the mountain and fall off a cliff. don't be caught without fire starter on your person. And then have a backup fire starter in your day pack. That way, if there's real bad weather, one of them gets wet, maybe you sit on your lighter or something and crack it and the fluid runs out, you'll have a backup. As far as types, man, I do like fire starters that don't take a ton of effort and a little bit of luck to work. A traditional, gas station type lighter, cigarette lighter, falls into that category. They can be finicky at high altitude, especially when they're wet and when it's cold. So for those conditions, carry some really good fire starters. I like the large, the oversized, heavy-duty waterproof matches really well. Pair that with something like pitch pine, sometimes called fat wood. It's basically just pine. It's slivers of pine that were impregnated with sap and then dyed, and that sap dried in it. They're heavy, they're super flammable, and they last forever. They'll burn for a long time. Another type of lighter that my kids actually love, just because they like to play with it, is a little plasma lighter, or laser lighter, something like that. That's not quite it, but it's an electric deal that you can recharge. I'm holding one in my hands right now. It's the Explorer. You can get these on Amazon for like $20. And when you activate it, there's a little arc that jumps between two electrodes. And if you touch that to paper, the end of a match or whatever, it will start it on fire. And this works really well with like pyro putty or some of the other types of starters. My favorite of these type, they're rubberized. They come with waterproof caps. And the one I like best has a little compartment with its own waterproof cap on the bottom end that I fill with a healthy little wad of pyro putty. Speaking of pyro putty, there's a bunch of different blends. The one I use the most is called the Winter Blend. It's blue, comes in cans like the size of a can of chewing tobacco, as well as little cans that are, for those of you who are familiar with them, that are about the size of a can of number 11 muzzleloader caps. And this stuff is almost cotton impregnated with some kind of wax, but it's flexible and you can pull it apart. It leaves all these little fuzzy strands on the end, and it catches sparks real well off a ferro rod or whatnot. And then it burns for quite a while like a hot candle. So tobacco can-sized container of it will serve you through several seasons, lighting fires under adverse conditions. Finally, of course, there's the bushcrafter's favorite tool, which is a really good ferro rod with high quality magnesium. The ones that I like the best come in a pre-set up stick called Fire-Fast, Fire-Fast, and they've got high quality magnesium. You can tell the difference. Cheap magnesium crumbles when you shave it. High quality magnesium shaves in little curls. And then of course a good ferro rod strikes real hot. And these Fire-Fast deals come with the two of them bonded together somehow and then embedded in a handle of some sort of really resinous African wood. The wood does not take on moisture. It's water resistant. You can drop it in a bucket of water and leave it overnight. Pull it out the next day and scrape a bunch of shavings off of it, and then put your magnesium on top of the shavings, strike it with your ferro rod. The magnesium will light, and then that wood, even though it's been in a bucket of water all night long, will light easily and well. Again, I think it's just that really resinous nature of it that prevents it from taking on moisture and makes it burn really well. Anyway, you want a really good ferro rod that sparks like the 4th of July, right? So there's various sizes of those Fire-Fast tools. I highly recommend them. I don't have affiliations with any of these guys, folks. Wish I did, but I just use them and recommend them because I've learned to trust them. And I think that's probably about all we need to talk about in fire starting. Let's move now to spare clothing. And this is kind of a personal deal. Some guys like synthetic, some guys like wool. Most guys are aware that cotton can be problematic. If it gets wet and then freezes next to your body, it can exacerbate the potential for hypothermia. So if you use cotton, use it carefully, be aware. I really like merino wool base layers, personally. And then depending on whether I'm in hot weather, cold weather, I'm anticipating a lot of rain or not. Then I decide whether I'm going to use synthetics or wool clothing on top of that. I love wool, but if it gets soaked, even though it'll still kind of maintain its insulating properties and keep you warm, it gets real heavy. So keep that in mind. Rain gear, I don't go with the lightest ultra packable stuff because it tears so easily if you have to wade through some brush, right? Especially if you're in something like Devil's Club in Alaska on the coast or whatever, or you're in raspberry bushes in the high Rocky Mountains, or you're just going through a thicket in a creek bottom somewhere. The really flimsy rain gear tears, and that's a bad deal. First, the stuff's usually expensive, so it hurts your wallet. Plus, it then exposes you to getting wet. I've used a lot of different types, and I kind of like a heavyweight packable rain gear. There's good stuff from Browning. That probably is the best value, dollar for dollar. The most expensive stuff I've used is Sitka Stormfront, and I've had really good luck with it personally, but it cost a pretty penny up front, right? As far as other clothing, I don't pack a whole bunch of extra socks and underwear and all that. I'll pack one extra pair, and when I change, partway through my hunt, I'll wash my dirty socks and underwear out in a nearby creek or whatever, hang them on a sunshiny afternoon to dry. That's all I need, right? I don't need a whole bunch of changes. Try not to get too sweaty. You won't build up bacteria and stink too fast. You get sweaty in the backcountry in the early season, of course, that's kind of inevitable, but it's a little less dangerous than the late season where you're always aware of the potential for hypothermia and so forth. Spare clothing, that can even just apply to having clean clothes back at the truck when you arrive there, bloody and stinky. You can change into fresh clothes for the 4-hour drive back home or whatever your situation is. It's a more pleasant journey, and you get a lot less funny looks when you go into gas stations on your way home. Medical supplies. This can be pretty crucial, but it doesn't necessarily need to be. Depending on the terrain you're in and your pre-existing conditions, depends on how you should assemble your medical supplies. First of all, if you have serious allergies, especially something like to bees, make sure that you've got epinephrine, that you've got an EpiPen on you in your pack, and ideally you hand one off to your hunting partner if you're not hunting solo. Make sure that people around you know the signs when you have an allergic reaction and how to operate the EpiPen, where to find it, and so forth. Same thing goes if you have acute asthma. Make sure that you've got a good inhaler and that your friends know where to find it. And maybe the scariest if you're hunting solo is diabetes. Make sure that you have a bracelet on or something instructing folks on what to do, letting them know you're diabetic, and hopefully just saying, hey, give me sugar, something like that if you're potentially susceptible to going into a diabetic coma. What else? Heart disease. That's a tough one. When I was guiding bow hunters, I had a father-son team come, and they came 2 days early to acclimate to the high altitude, which was awesome. We were going into elk country. What wasn't awesome is sitting around visiting at their hotel the night before we went in. The dad, who was in his late 50s, admitted to me that he had had a quadruple bypass 4 months earlier that summer. And said, I'm going to have to kind of take it easy on this one. Oh my gosh, we were heading into 10,000 feet, and he was from low country, something like 400 feet altitude. He clearly wasn't in good shape. He'd been convalescing since having his massive surgery and hadn't been able to get out and push himself. And now we were going into country where we typically covered 6 to 10 miles a day in mountainous country, mountainous terrain on foot. And it really surprised me. He rather cheerfully admitted that he didn't really lie, but he certainly omitted that information from the medical form that we send to all of our clients before they come out. He said, I didn't think you'd let me come if you read about it. And I looked at him, I said, you're right. and it could be that you're in for a pretty rough time. We're going to do our best since you're here, but just be aware, right? Well, halfway in, we were at 10,000 feet coming across the mountain. We took the longer route in. You can go straight up the mountain. A harder short pull, but real steep, and I knew he wasn't up for that. So we went clear around, found a trailhead that was miles further away, but it was fairly level going, maintaining a kind of the same altitude. We'd made it halfway in, probably 2 to 3 miles, and he was gray in the face. He could only go 100 yards between long rests, and he was really struggling. So I found an elk trail and sat him on it and said, I'm going to go into main camp and get the horses, and I'll come back for you. Just watch this trail. Maybe you'll get lucky and an elk will come past. Well, that night, he didn't sleep a wink. He was struggling for breath so much he couldn't sleep. The next day, he was too weak to hunt. It was an effort for him to get from the sleeping tent to the cook tent, which was about 100 feet. But he was too stubborn to consider going down to a lower elevation. I hunted hard with his son the next day. His son was in great shape. We had a wonderful time. That night, his dad was in rougher shape. I could see his son was concerned. And the next morning, I said, sir, we're evacuating because I'm afraid you're going to die on me up in here. We got to get you to lower country. So he agreed. At that point, I think he was relieved to have his hand forced. He was a tough guy. I got to give him that. He had a lot of spirit, but he just was not in capable condition for hunting elk in that high country. So we hauled him out on a horse and took him down to 6,000 feet was the lowest place we could find a hotel. And within hours, he was feeling much better. And he just hung out there for the remainder of the week. Every night, his son and I would pull out of the high country and go and share our stories with him. And we had a great hunt, which he kind of had to live through vicariously because he wasn't prepared. But just be aware that if you have a condition, particularly if there's potential for a heart attack, that you carry nitroglycerin or whatever it is. I'm not super familiar with that. Well, you carry your heart medication with you, and again, hunt with the partner. Make sure they're aware of how to handle a situation if one occurs. Okay, moving on. How about infection, injury, like actual injury, and the most common problem of all in the backcountry, severe blister treatment. For infection, if you can get it, it's really worth keeping some antibiotics on hand. Don't take them willy-nilly, right? Antibiotics have a lot of side effects. But if you can get a 10-day course of a fairly broad-spectrum antibiotic and keep it in your hunting pack, do so. That way, if you ever get stuck and you're getting real infected, you can possibly save a finger or something like that in the backcountry. But the main thing is when an injury occurs, get it clean, folks. Go flush it with a bunch of water. And here's where that soap comes in handy again. Now, I'm not a drinking man. I don't carry alcohol into the backcountry, but whether or not you have soap, alcohol makes a pretty good disinfectant as well. So if you have soap, use it in addition to the soap. If you don't have soap, shame on you first, right? A little hotel-sized bar is all you need. But if you don't have soap and you do have some good whiskey or whatever, apply it liberally to the wound. And then I hear if the injured person is, struggling as well, you could apply it to their innards too. Okay, injury. This is a tough one. If you've got the time and the interest and the means, I highly recommend attending some courses on wilderness first aid, and better yet, wilderness first responder skills and methods. I took the first responder course when I was starting to guide, and it's a full 10-day course. Amazing knowledge and information. The first aid kit, or not kit, but course, the first responder first aid course, the wilderness first aid course, not first responder, but first aid is much more compact, abbreviated, much more achievable, candidly, for most people. But if you can do the wilderness first responder course, that's amazing. You'll even learn stuff like potentially, assisting in childbirth. You'll learn how to reduce testicular torsion, which I hear can be kind of a crucial skill at times and in certain situations. You'll learn how to relocate joints that have popped out. And you'll learn how to improvise splints on everything up to and including compound fractured femurs. You'll learn how to recognize serious issues compared to temporary ones, where you may have to make a judgment call on whether you call a helicopter for evacuation or you and your pals spend a day and a half carrying your partner out and save the $50,000 helicopter flight, right? So anyway, get some training if you can. It may save your life or a friend's life in the future. Blisters, man, they're common. Most of you probably know how to handle them fairly well. The best treatment is to prevent them from happening. Don't be a hero. Don't be too proud to stop your hunting partner on a long hike in and say, hey, hold on, I'm getting a hot spot. I need to take care of this now. Get your feet dried off. Take your boots off. Get your feet dried off and cooled down, and then put leuko tape on that hot spot. It's spelled Leuko, I believe. It's basically a glorified sports tape, and it sticks like nothing else. It'll be there for the duration of your 10-day hunt. It'll prevent that blister from occurring. If a blister sneaks up on you, same thing. Put some leuko tape over it. If you want, take some moleskin as well. Provides a little additional layer of padding over it, but it just doesn't stick as well as the leuko tape. A roll of leuko tape can double for a lot of things. You can patch boots back together if they start coming apart. You can tape an ankle that gets a light sprain or whatever. A lot of really good uses for this extraordinary tape. Okay, how about eyeglasses or contacts if you wear them? I've never done it, but I know people that have lost their glasses in the backcountry, and a long way from the truck, and a much longer drive back home to get their spare glasses, if they even have them, right? Eyeglasses can get crushed, they can get lost, and if that happens, and if you have pretty bad vision, you're going to be a world of hurt. I could get by barely without my glasses, but I would not spot much game. I'd have a hard time shooting. I would have a hard time reading maps and stuff like Onyx maps on my phone. So I always try and have my past prescription worth of eyeglasses in a hard case in my main pack. It's not going to be quite as sharp and clear. There's probably going to be scratches on it compared to my current fresh prescription, but in a pinch, it will really, really make a big difference, help me finish a hunt most effectively. Contacts, I've never worn them. William, my boy, wears them and really likes them, and he just keeps a couple extra packs in his hunting pack when he goes. So that's an easier solution, right? You can even keep one in your pockets in case you get a bunch of dust in your eye. You can pop that one out if you don't have the ability to rinse it effectively enough, or maybe it's a disposal. You just pop in a new one, right, and keep hunting. Okay, next on my list I've got spare ammo and a backup rifle. Now, you don't always need the backup rifle, right? But it can come in handy. If there's a group of you, let's say 4 of you are hunting together, going into elk country together, just having one is just fine. And having a good basic rifle that's not super expensive with a good usable scope on it, but properly sighted in, is probably your best bet. You don't need to have a $5,000 custom rifle sitting in your truck or back at base camp as your backup gun. Spare ammo, I always hunt with at least 14 or 15 rounds on my body, right? If I'm not at super high elevation and hiking a whole bunch of miles every day, I keep at least a partial box and maybe a full box of additional ammo in my day pack. This gives me the capability on the move. If I have a bad fall and I hit my scope real hard and I check it with a shot and it's off, way off, I've got plenty of ammo to re-zero with. 14 or 15 rounds should enable you to do that, but sometimes it doesn't. I was 22 miles into the Bob Marshall Wilderness in Montana one time and had one of the worst falls I've ever had on my scope, and it actually damaged the scope to the point where it would no longer adjust predictably. The adjustment stayed. When I'd move a turret, the crosshair would move a kind of unpredictable amount, and it might move the wrong direction, but thank goodness it would stay put after the adjustment. And I had 33 rounds on me. That's kind of another story, but inspiration from an old hunting mentor. He always carried 33, and I just kind of picked up the habit between base camp and what I had on my person. And it took me a whole bunch of those rounds, more than 20, to get to where finally those crosshairs were in the right spot when I left the turret alone, and they held, and I was able to continue hunting, I think with 7 or 9 rounds, something like that. It was enough, but none too many. So good reason to have spare ammo in your base camp. Make sure it's the good stuff too. Don't just throw a cheap box of something or other in there just in case. Make sure it's the same stuff that you're already sighted in for. Same thing goes for your extra arrows and a bow repair kit. You know, if you get in a mix-up and you make an imperfect shot, heaven forbid, right? We all strive for that clean first shot kill, but stuff can happen. We're humans, and it's challenging environment out there. You may need to come back to your truck to resupply in arrows and go get that job finished as properly as you can. The bow repair kit can be as simple as some good bow wax in case you start getting like a frayed spot on your bowstring, a little bow tool that you can tighten up your sights, your quiver. You know, this is pretty important. It's important enough that I'll carry a little bow tool with a bunch of hex head wrenches on it in my day pack with me when I'm bow hunting. Primarily for 2 things. One is noise. If your quiver or something starts to come loose, you know, screws holding it in start to come loose, you get a buzz in your bow, and when you shoot it, it makes your bow a lot noisier. More importantly is if your sight or your rest comes a little bit loose. And again, as I mentioned in the beginning of this, riding around on a 4-wheeler or any kind of an ATV or in a pickup truck, there's a lot of low frequency vibration. That sort of thing tends to loosen screws. And if you notice there's a screw coming loose on your bow anywhere from your sight, your rest, one of your cam stop settings, anything like that, you can tighten it down if you have a bow tool along. Carry a bow tool. Okay, batteries. How many of you have run out of power with your headlamp or maybe some kind of a GPS or a handheld radio type device in the backcountry? I'd wager pretty much everybody that uses that sort of thing. So I always make a point of carrying 2 headlamps in my pack. This is for 2 reasons. One is eventually one of them will go dead and I'll be glad I have a spare. But more frequently, somebody will shoot something and one of your hunting partners won't have a headlamp. And if you share a headlamp with that person, you have got a whole bunch more help breaking down an animal in the dark and then getting out of there safely. It can be real important. So I always carry compact headlamps, 2 of them with lithium batteries inside, and I carry 1 change of batteries for those headlamps. Same thing goes with handheld radios. And yes, lithium batteries are super expensive, but man, they last so much longer. You carry a lot less weight. It's worth the cost to take lithiums into the backcountry. Next on my list is a backup knife. Now, in a recent episode, I talked about the knives that I carry every day while hunting. I'm always going to have one of my Simbita custom knives made by Evan Simbita, the Northern Shrike model that we kind of co-designed and we sell limited edition runs of here through the podcast. It's my all-time favorite hunting knife, and not just because I helped design it, folks. It's honest to goodness a splendid blade. Very light, very ergonomic, and made out of the best steel that you can buy. And then, of course, I carry a little folding replaceable blade knife as well. I use that for caping, especially when I'm cutting like the lips and gums loose around the teeth of an elk or something. Teeth are hard on a good blade, and I like to save the blade on my fixed blade knife. You can use the little Havalon or Browning or Outdoor Edge type replaceable blade knife for caping around the tear ducts and so forth when you want a real fine tip and super sharp scalpel type blade. I don't like them for most work. If I only have one, it's definitely going to be a fixed blade knife, but I do carry the 2. I mean, it's like 2 ounces for a little folding interchangeable blade knife. But Always, always, always back at base camp, whether it's your truck or a big camp, right? Have a backup knife. It doesn't need to be your favorite, most expensive custom knife, but it should be a good knife. I'm playing with one here in front of me right now that's made by Montana Knife Company, and of the knives I've used that are production type knives that approach custom knife quality, Montana Knife Company has kind of emerged as my favorites. They're a really cool company. Hopefully I'll be able to have the founder of the company come on the podcast sometime in the near future and talk us through his knives. But you can have anything like this, right on down to a fairly inexpensive knife by whatever brand, as long as it's a good ergonomic knife that you can sharpen well, that will get you through butchering. Let's be optimistic. Maybe you're in there with 2 or 3 friends and you end up putting 3 elk on the ground and you've lost your good hunting knife. It's going to be a real effort to break down 3 or 4 big bull elk with nothing but a little folding replaceable blade knife. Just word to the wise there, have a good backup knife in base camp. Next on my list, we've talked about soap and the medical thing. What about some common conditions that develop with skin related, usually with prolonged exposure at high altitude, frequent winds, and all day outdoor activities? We're talking sunburn and chapped skin, whether it's your lips, your fingertips, whatever. Keep some salve on hand, and that can just be as simple as a stick of high quality chapstick. You can use that on anything from your lips to your fingertips. I like to carry sunscreen. I don't carry separate like lotion and sunscreen, although sometimes I think maybe I should, but I never do. I just carry a high quality sunscreen because that is pretty good at taming that chapped skin that you get on the back of your knuckles, your cheekbones and stuff after a lot of time in high wind and sun outdoors. And cold. Cold can be real bad as well. How about a little thing that most of us don't usually consider like a necessary backup item, and that's meat sacks. For whatever reason, over the years, many times, either I've come up short on meat sacks or a friend has come up short. Maybe you get one real dirty when you're doing your initial butcher or something and you want to transfer that meat into a fresh bag before you could put it in your pack and haul it out or whatever. There are a lot of different good meat sacks. I'm playing with one in front of me right here by Gracksaw, Grakksaw. The XL game bags. A little kit like this stashed in your truck or at your base camp can really help a guy out, whether it's you or a partner. And sometimes, folks, it's as simple as, let's say you get 2 elk and one of them for some reason gets somewhat dirty. The meat on it gets dirty, whether it's from a horse that falls, and those bags, meat sacks, go rolling down a pine and dirt covered slope. Or maybe you just have a lazy hunting partner or sloppy hunting partner. Maybe they got overwhelmed in water and mud and it's pouring rain and they're trying to quarter it off and they just couldn't. Maybe they're solo. They couldn't keep it clean. Stuff happens, right? Maybe you just need to separate your meat and protect it, or the clean bowl. Maybe it's you that got your meat dirty. Separate that dirty meat from the clean stuff just so you don't spread the contamination, right? You're going to take the dirty meat home, wash it, trim it, take care of it. It'll be fine. It's just a lot more work, right? Okay, so meat sacks I think is a cheap investment that will pay off and make life better for you in the long run. Of course, at this point, we're out of the non-essentials, folks, as far as emergency stuff goes, and this is just really handy things. Now, we talked about the importance of having a good book along. If you can afford the weight, take a good book in proper book form. There's just something special about sitting by a fire or by a creekside with a line in the water or whatever and reading out of a real book. I keep mine in a gallon-sized Ziploc bag just because otherwise invariably they get wet and kind of distorted and it's not good for them. Alternately, you can load books onto a tablet or even a phone, especially the plus size phones these days. And taking it a step further, I really like to have a bunch of podcasts downloaded, and audiobooks are a good other option to download and have some earbuds, whatever, in-ear listening microphones that you can use while you're glassing. This is a trick I've used that helps me stay focused and relaxed and pay attention with my eyes, because my mind is being entertained hour after hour while I'm glassing from a high point, looking for elk movement or a wily old mule deer buck to stand up in the middle of the day, turn around, stretch, maybe have a bite or two before he lays back down. And of course, the glassing intensive stuff like coos deer hunting can be really advantageous to have a good story playing in at least one ear while you focus on glassing. Now, how about a different category of gear? And I'm going to call this escape gear. This is for generally getting your truck back out to civilization. Let's assume that even if you had a base camp that you'd packed in, you're able to haul that out, or in catastrophic emergency, you just take the crucial items, the vital gear, and you get to your truck, right? Leave the rest. When you get to your truck, it's a good idea to have a spare tire, and since you're probably up a dirt road with a lot of sharp rocks and stuff in it, it's a good idea to have a full-size spare tire in good condition. Don't just throw an old, cracked, and worn-out tire in and call it good. Also have emergency plugs for that tire, all your tires, and know how to use them, and have a tire pump. Some folks will use a traditional old-fashioned bike pump type thing. They're time-consuming, but they work no matter what. As long as you can function them or somebody can function them, they will fill a tire with air. More easily, have a small battery-powered electric air pump. A toolkit. Now, this is especially important for guys that are decent mechanics. They have an understanding of internal combustion motors and how they work. And that is not me, folks. I can fix most guns, but automobiles and I have never learned to understand each other very well. Still, a toolkit can be important for anything from changing a tire to getting a jammed tailgate free so that you can more easily load meat in, or back up to your fifth wheel horse trailer, whatever the case is. It's always important to have some kind of a fundamental toolkit in your truck. A shovel, the worst time I've ever got stuck in my life was with all four of my kids and a neighbor boy. We were scouting for bear baits, and it was early spring, and we went down a long slope on a decent gravel road and drove over a hard-packed, icy section. Well, coming out, there's no way to go around, right? It was one way in, one way out. Coming up that slope in late afternoon, we discovered that ice pack was 2 feet deep and it had turned into slush. We got into it about 100 yards and sunk way past our axles. I mean, the axles were sunk in the snow, right? We did not have a shovel. We worked for hours till it was almost dark trying to get out of there. And finally, thank goodness, some houndsmen with souped up Toyotas and a bunch of tow straps and chains found us and pulled us the rest of the way through that mush and got us out of there. Keep a tow strap as well as that shovel in your truck. And a funny thing I discovered by accident, I didn't have a tow strap that trip, but I had a bunch of extra heavy duty tie downs, the type that semi-truck drivers will use, big broad straps with heavy duty ratchets. And they proved to be really valuable because this snowpack was on a slope and on a corner, and as I tried to work that truck free and up and out through that stuff, it kept sliding further and further toward the edge, to the point where the back end of the truck slid over and was almost ready to go over that edge, and it was several hundred feet worth of pine-covered steep slope to the bottom of the canyon. We used that ratchet strap around my bumper hitch and a big pine tree to pull the truck back up on the road an inch at a time. Kind of saved our bacon there. A little bit of an accidental discovery. So What else? You know, a full gas can be real important in your truck. It can do anything from fill your four-wheeler if you need to make one trip back for some more meat where you had your base camp, to getting you out of there if you get stuck for a long time, you waste a bunch of fuel, whatever. Just, it's a good idea to have some fuel with you. That can be diesel, right, if you're driving a big diesel truck. And I guess that's just about it, folks. As far as I can think of, those are the primary ones on my list. I'm sure there's more, but that's what I got. We would love to hear any recommendations for essential gear that we left out of this episode. Just as I mentioned in the beginning here, email joseph@backcountrypodcast.com with your suggestions, recommendations, especially if you have any stories of gear items that proved crucial to you in getting out of the backcountry or just staying safe in the backcountry and past experiences. Better yet, write in on patreon.com/backcountry. Okay, how about a final thought? There's one absolutely essential thing that I left off this list. Partly that's because you should keep it handy no matter where you are at all times. This one's a bit tongue-in-cheek, folks, but don't leave your brain in base camp. As the best survival trainers always say, the most important tool in your kit is your mind. Keep your head about you, folks, and you can handle just about anything. I'm Joseph von Benedict, and I'll see you in the backcountry.